Father, we honor the heart of your Son, broken by man's cruelty, yet symbol of love and of love's triumph. Model of all that man is called to be, teach us to see Christ in the lives we touch and to offer him a living worship by a love-filled service to our brothers and sisters. We ask this through Christ our Lord. I better not keep looking at that clock, because on that clock it's only 9:10. It would be a disaster if I am led by that clock. Yesterday, Brother Gautier, present here, told me something that comforted me a little when he told me that the conferences by the Salesian French Provincial at last year's retreat in Canada were never less than 2 hours long. Mamma mia, how did they do it? They would have to take me out on a stretcher, or maybe also you. We had a wonderful teacher of eloquence at the Theological Institute of Crocetta. His name was Alessio Barberis, who was the nephew of the famed Barberis of Don Bosco's days. Do you know what he told us at the very first conference? He said, a short sermon, even if not very good, is usually ends up by being effective and acceptable. A very good sermon that is too long ends up by either not being either very effective or acceptable. I think there is a lot of wisdom to this. And he also told us, and evidently, if I'm not mistaken, referred the statement to Don Bosco himself, who said, when you talk to youngsters, remember this, the first 5 minutes, you and they know what you are talking about. The second 5 minutes, only you know what you are talking about. And the third 5 minutes, neither you nor they know what you are talking about. We heard the name of St. Francis de Sales mentioned, and specifically referring to what it called the optimistic humanism of St. Francis de Sales. If Father Williams is correct, and we assume he is, and ignorance of Don Bosco in this province is monumental, then I am afraid that our knowledge of Francis de Sales is zero. And yet it was Don Caviglia who said that we will never understand Don Bosco until we try to understand Francis de Sales, who was a very human man, down to earth, brimming with joy, a gentleman every inch of him, and full of a lovely sense of humor. They should have a collection of his humorous sayings. They are precious. For instance, he always scolded a bishop friend of his for being distant, harsh, for not being able to open up to people. It was the very opposite of everything Francis himself was. One day he told him, he said, look, there is only one person you made happy in your life, the woman you did not marry. Do you get it? The only person you really made happy in your life is the woman you did not marry. That was Francis de Sales. One of the first French Salesians, his name was Father Charles Bellamy, received into the society by St. John Bosco himself, was nearing 50 years of age, shortly after Don Bosco died, when, a prey to a severe spiritual crisis, asked to leave the society in order to join the Trappist order. Father Bellamy, according to Don Binelli, was a born leader. He was responsible for the consolidation of the Salesian work in France and in Algeria. His decision to join the Trappists came as a surprise to all who knew him. But not surprised they were when less than a year later he was back knocking at Don Roa's door. I should have never left Don Bosco, he told him. For a while, I thought I had found what I was looking for, a quiet environment where I could pray and be at peace, away from the noisy whirlwind of Salesian activity. There was peace and quiet, of course, with the Trappists, but how terribly cold everything and everyone. Hardly ever a smile, or a cordial word, or even a gesture. Oh, the family spirit in our houses. One never appreciates it so much as when he is away from it. The words of Bellamy. The title of this little conversation is that we are a family. Our society is a family. Don Bosco conceived it as such he wanted it to be. We form and actually are a family. Family spirit is one of our most genuine characteristics, if not the most genuine characteristic. It is the secret, the key to the well-being in our communities and in our educational system. Whoever holds any kind of responsibility or authority, from the rector major down, must be convinced of this. None more than the provincial and the director. The words are of Don Rinaldi, Don Bosco's successor. Now allow me again a parenthesis and a personal recollection. I'm afraid this retreat will go down as in the history of as the retreat of the personal recollection. What can you do when you get old? You think of the past. You live the past. Truly they say old people travel best on memory lanes, so I'm old. When I first got to the oratory school with my twin brother, who incidentally became a Salesian but died before he was 20, his name was Paul. The fact is that I was deathly homesick in those first days. Dad had told us to go to see Father Philip, Don Rinaldi, but not too often, he said. A day or so after we arrived at the school, feeling miserable, the two of us went looking for him. We did not find him in his office, so we went up to his room. Heedless boys that we were, we kept knocking at his door to no avail. Suddenly, from the nearby room, a small white-haired priest came out. And who are these two Monelli, these two young scamps disturbing the peace, he said. We identified ourselves. He gently gave us a little lesson on politeness. Never give more than one or two light taps at the bedroom door or any door, he told us. Now, he continued smiling, since your Father Philip is evidently not in, come to see Don Francesio. He was Don Francesco. And it did not take us long, did not take him long to note how homesick we really were. The man radiated kindness, even outwardly. He was in every sense of the word a lovable man, a full mop of white hair, like a halo around his head. His eyes were small, but piercing, bright, and sparkling. Out came the chocolates from his desk drawer, but even more than the chocolates, his words, his questions, his interest in us were not anything that we ever got from our stuffy priests back home. When on the following morning, waiting for my turn to serve Mass in the sacristy of the Basilica, I spotted him vesting, I went right over to him, anxious to serve his Mass. Absorbed in his thoughts or in his prayers, he did not notice me as I grabbed the missal and walked ahead of him to the appointed side altar in the Basilica. At the washing of the hands, he looked at me. "We met yesterday, didn't we?" he asked me. "Yes, Father." "Are you still homesick?" "Not much, Father. There are more chocolates waiting." And on he went, washing his hands, and lavabo inter innocentes manus meas. How could one be homesick with men like Don Francesco, or with men, all kinds of Salesians at the oratory in those days? So you don't mind if we get back to Don Rinaldi. Two things impressed him particularly in Don Bosco, in all his many contacts he had with him. First, his spirit of union with God. Second, his fatherliness. Don Rinaldi writes, Don Bosco was in every sense a father. He spoke to us as if each one had been a favorite with him. He shared with us his joys and sorrows, his ideas and plans. To him we went freely and spoke freely. Even if we complained to him about something, as children might do with their father, we always found him eager to listen, kind and understanding. And we might add humble, too, as so many Salesians tell us knew him, which is something superiors do not always find easy to be. There are gems in the life of our founder which are often overlooked. Here is one. Listen. For many years, Coadjutor Giuseppe Dogliani doubled as the Basilica choir director and with a big name in the musical world, and also as head waiter in the Superior's dining room. One evening, Don Bosco was late for supper, having spent long hours in the confessional. All that was left was a bowl of rice that had not as much as been warmed over. Dogliani remonstrated with the cook. He was an outside worker who was about to close up for the evening, for the day. "Haven't you anything better?" he asked him. "It's for Don Bosco." "He is no better than anybody else," the cook shot back within Don Bosco's hearing. Dogliani apologized to the founder for the cook's foolish words, and Don Bosco calmly, "He is right. I have no business to be late." But here is the best of the story. A few days later, important guests came for dinner. It seems everything went wrong with that dinner, beginning with the soiled tablecloth and the napkins no one could find. You know, those things happen. A positive disgrace, Don Bosco said later to Doriani. You are in charge. How can things like this happen? Don Bosco's unusual outburst surprised and unsettled Doriani. Later in the day he slipped a note under Don Bosco's door in which he told him he never thought he could be treated so harshly by him. And he added, I did not think it possible you could be so angry with anyone, least of all with me. On the following day, Don Bosco humbly apologized to Doriani. Do you remember, he told him, what the cook said about Don Bosco not being better than anyone else? Well, now you know it is true. You must help me with your prayers. With a superior like that, no wonder the oratory was a family. Pius XI, the Pope beatified and canonized our founder, felt the glow and the warmth of that family spirit when as a young priest he visited with Don Bosco at the oratory for several days. It was, he said, the glow and the warmth of Don Bosco's great heart. I must open a little parenthesis, bear with me. The name of Don Bosco's third successor, Don Rinaldi, recurs so often in this conversation, that I feel a little embarrassed. I would be happier at this point if my name was Smith or some such. But I know that you understand that it is not the name I'm trying to promote, but the example, the ideas, the teachings of a man who understood Don Bosco's mind and heart in an extraordinary way. And we wonder how this man met by Don Bosco in Loo, our native village, when he was 12 or so, and told by Don Bosco, Philip, think about this, the Lord wants you to be a priest. How resolutely this boy said to him, no, I will never be a priest. Don Bosco smiled, but for 10 years he kept after him, unbelievable, with letters, visiting at Loo, and always amiably telling this youngster until he was 22, Philip, you don't think about it, but the Lord wants you to be a priest, and so he should. Suddenly it happened. You know, for instance, that he was seriously thinking of marriage. His name had been connected with the name of a girl in the town. In those days, you know, people acted on marriage. They would sort of throw feelers and then hoping that the two would get together. And this happened in his case. Then suddenly everything changed. He realized Don Bosco was right. And when he went to Aldoca, Don Bosco told him, I've been waiting for you for the last 10 years. The mystery of it all, and how it turned out to be such a marvelous interpreter of Don Bosco's mind and heart. When in 1950 I went back to Italy after an absence of some 15 years here in the States, I found our rector major, Don Ricardone, aged, sickly. He died a few months later, yet more fatherly than I had ever known him to be. His words I shall not ever forget. He said, you must have been pleased when you heard that Father Philip's cause of beatification was introduced. I lived with him for some 35 years and never doubted he was the saint. But I see in his cause of beatification the recognition of the fatherliness that was so distinctly his, and two, of the family spirit which he promoted incessantly as the truly genuine feature of our congregation. And Don Ricaldone continued, Don Rua will be the saint to remind us that we must be faithful to Don Bosco. And Father Philip, that we must be amabili. Now, the amabili is not translated as amiable in English, which would not make sense. Amabile in Italian is best translated as one who knows how and wants to make himself loved. Incidentally, the last words of Don Bosco to Don Rua in a whisper were these: Fatti amare. Make yourself loved. All who knew Don Rinaldi not only but his addresses and writings testify that he was never more articulate than when he spoke or wrote about the importance, the necessity of family spirit. It was not solely his implicit faith in Don Bosco's ideas, teachings, and example, but his own instinctive insight into human nature, so responsive to love and kindness. It was that prompted him to insist in season and out of season that we Salesians are and must in effect be a family. On the role of the Salesian Superior, he has this to say: he must constantly remind himself that he is, before anything else, a father. If a Salesian is not convinced of this, if by temperament and character he is unable to be a father, he should not be provincial or director. It is not the provincial's or the director's job to be an administrator, a public relations man, a lecturer, or whatever. His task is to be a father. To his niece, who turned to him for advice when she was faced with her first assignment as superior, he said, your first concern is to safeguard the family spirit in the community. Do you see that radiator? Evidently it was in the winter. It radiates heat and keeps this room quite comfortable. Your role as a superior is to radiate calm, serenity, cheerfulness. God help a Salesian community ruled over by a gloomy, grumpy superior who wears her authority like a porcupine wears its sharp quills. And I have known other superiors to be like that. To a provincial, he wrote, be careful not to invoke the rule at every turn, or worse, to use it as a sort of a whip. The Salesian superior must govern with the heart, not with the rule. It is the heart that makes us love the rule. If, as a provincial, he was writing to a provincial, you are unable to get the confreres to love you, then you are out of place, and you should ask to be removed. To a director, you complain too easily about your confreres. Do not make too much of their faults, which are often due to adverse conditions of health, of work. You should rather be concerned that they are in good health, content and cheerful. Here is how he draws the sketch of the Salesian superior. He is available always. He is at everyone's disposal, day and night. He must be ready to receive anyone at any time. First comes his community, his children. For them he must leave aside his own comfort, his books, other works, even prayer. If the confreres are not free to speak to him, to the director, about their problems, they will do so among themselves, with resulting tensions and dissatisfaction. The director must be convinced that if the confreres, especially the young ones, do not find love, acceptance, and understanding in the community, they will soon look for these things elsewhere. For Don Bosco's third successor, Father Philip, the breakdown of the family spirit in the Salesian community meant the breakdown of the community itself. It meant that each member would soon be on the lookout for himself and his own interests, with little or no concern for anybody else except his own self. It is at this point Don Rinaldi remarks that a confrere will often be tempted to form his own little world around himself, often even outside the community, to which to repair as often as possible. A statement at a good night during the director's retreat is worth quoting. Listen. Before you see the religious and the Salesian in a confrere, try to see in him the human being. Well, now, I wonder if at this point we should not think also of that poor guy who, being director of the provincial, may be trying his very best to be a father, but with little success with rebellious children. I wonder if we should not see in him the man too, the confrere, before we see the director of the provincial. And Don Rinaldi thought so too. He once wrote to a confrere who was making life difficult for his director, "Don't you think it is time for you to give your poor director," notice the word poor, "to give your poor director a little more cooperation? All you do is add to his problems. Surely he has to treat you like a father, and I know he's doing his best to do so. But what kind of a son are you to him? Someday you may well be a superior yourself. Your greatest consolation will then be to know that the confreres around you try hard to help you carry the burden of responsibility." Family spirit is a two-way street. A confrere who thinks differently and expects to be treated like a spoiled child by the superior, to whom he may be of little help and comfort, that confrere does not know the ABC of the Salesian spirit and shows only a dismal lack of formation. But it is true, Don Rinaldi makes this point frequently, that the burden to promote the family spirit in the community falls squarely on the shoulders of the superior. Do you find another parenthesis? I notice, maybe it strikes me all the more, because at this point in Europe they have not quite reached this particular point. So I notice that we have become extremely democratic and very familiar with names. It used to be Signor Direttore, Signor Ispettore, and now it's John, Dominic, and even Dom, which is fine, certainly. But to a point, what I mean that if this is dictated by genuine fraternal feelings, no one could object to it. If with those feelings there is also a little bit of respect, there should be, I'm sure there is. So we are brothers even when we occupy positions of responsibility. To a Salesian, whom he had appointed director here in the States, and who complained to him, Don Rinaldi, that being only 28 years old, he was going to feel terribly uneasy and out of place with older confreres. Don Rinaldi wrote, "But look, you're not going there as their superior. You're going there as their father and their brother, older brother." That beautiful statement, before you see the religious and the Salesian in the confrere, he told the rectors, try to see in him the human being. Listen to this. In Italy, during the First World War, priests and seminarians and members of religious orders were drafted into active military service. Active. None of this medical stuff. When indeed the rule provided that the confreres who were given a leave were to report immediately to the Salesian house nearest to where they were. Don Guido Borra, who was later to become a member of the Superior Council, he died 2 or 3 months ago, a wonderful man. I'm sure Father Borbatello remembers and how we remember him. He was our priest of studies in Iorio. Don Guido Borra tells this incredible story. When I arrived at the oratory on my first leave, I was coming from the front and was physically and emotionally exhausted. I had but one wish, to get home as fast as possible to see my parents. I ran into Don Barberis, the catechist general. Surely he was a good man and very kind, and too somewhat senile at that point. The good man kept me for almost 1 hour. So he said I could make my rendiconto, a manifestation of conscience. I could tell him how I'd practiced my vows. At the end he told me to go to Valsalice immediately for a 3-day retreat. Now, with a leave of 6 days, I was not going to do anything of the kind. So I went to the Vicar General, Don Rinaldi, because at that time Don Albera, rector major, was not well. No sooner did he see me and greet me that he said, "You must go home to your parents as soon as possible. Do you need any money? Let's see if you can make it home before night." He checked the train schedule. There is a train leaving for Alessandria at 2 o'clock. You can have lunch first, but don't go to the oratory dining room. Come to the council's dining room. You can probably use a good meal, and if Don Albera is well enough, he'd be happy to see you. Don Borra concludes, in my long life as a Salesian, I was novice master, director, provincial, and a member of the Superior Council. I never forgot Don Rinaldi's kindness to a poor, homesick young lieutenant back from the front who so needed the warmth of a good word and even more, an understanding heart. He has always been my model. How important for superiors to see first and always the human being in a confrere. Remember it, superiors and future superiors. What impressed me when I first got to the oratory was that everyone seemed pleasant, kind, and cheerful. My brother and I arrived, I well remember, before the school year began. And so for several days we ate with the confreres, which was fine. The meals were much better. The unrestrained allegria, the banter, the laughter of those Salesians were not anything we were used to in our parish church in Lou. It was a collegiate church with canons, very solemn, very proper. They would hardly ever exchange a word with us altar boys, and we knew better than be in their way. The question now, are we still cheerful in our community? This too is a byproduct of the family spirit. I've been in several houses in Europe, and I think we are becoming a little too proper and solemn, like the canons in my hometown years ago. I think there is tremendous. We should be cheerful, there's no question. In fact, I might scandalize some of you if I tell you that right under the nose of Don Bosco and of Don Rua, cheerfulness sometimes took on expressions that we would think unbelievable and unthinkable now. Toward the end of March 1913, a telegram announced to the director of the House of Studies in Polizzo, near Turin, that a missionary bishop, Bishop so-and-so, from the Milan Foreign Missions, would visit the community on April 1st. Punctually at 10 o'clock, the bearded bishop arrived at the station, reverently and cordially received by the director, who showed him to the waiting carriage. The student body, young students of theology, young Salesians, the band, the speeches, all went as planned and rehearsed, and so did the dinner and the special program at which the bishop spoke eloquently of his missionary experiences. After a full day of feasting and a final blessing from the good bishop, he was taken to the station to catch the train to Milan. A few days later, all hell broke loose when word reached the House of Studies at Polizzo that the bishop who visited them on April 1st was not a bishop at all, not a missionary either, but one of the oratory's coadjutors, Brother Rusconi, director of the Valdocco Dramatic Society, an accomplished actor, as everyone knew. He had been one grand way of celebrating April Fool's Day. And they say that Don Albert, even he, Director Major, had a good laugh. But Don Rua did not laugh, at least not in public, at what happened at what happened in Lanzo during a retreat. Many of you remember, I'm sure, that benediction in those days, in the preconciliar liturgy, required that at least 14 candles be lit on the altar. There were many more candles on the altar in the Lanzo chapel on the first 2 evenings of the retreat. Actually, the poor sacristan, the coadjutor in charge, had trouble lighting them, and was still at it during the exposition of the sacrament. At the supper table, or dinner, complaints were heard from every side, until the beleaguered sacristan challenged anyone who thought he could do better to take over the following day. One of the clerics volunteered. "I will do it in 2 minutes. I'll light all the candles in 2 minutes." Brother Coadjutor Sacristan decided he might as well have a little revenge and some harmless fun. What did he do? He carefully clipped the wick of most of the candles on the altar and left only 2 or 3 or just a few here and there untouched. Came the moment everyone was waiting for. Of course, nobody knew that Coadjutor so-and-so had clipped the wick off most of the candles. The self-appointed cleric sexton tried to light several candles to no avail. Finally, he lit one. Frantically moving from one candle to another, he succeeded to light 2 more. From the sacristy came the director of the retreat with another candle lighter. with similarly disastrous results. You can just imagine by now the congregation, probably close to 100 confreres. Don Rua was present, incidentally. It was finally decided to give benediction with the ciborium, which required only 2 candles. At the good night, Don Rua deprecated the explosion of collective hilarity during the service. Everything in its proper place and time, he said, certainly never at the expense of the decorum and reverence due to the house of God. And one could go on and on with more such delightful fiorettis indicative of the overflowing cheerfulness and family spirit among those exuberant Salesians. When Don Bosco sent confreres to open a new house, his parting words were, "Vogliatevi bene," love one another. But actually, love in English does not translate the Italian voler bene, which literally means to want the best for a person one loves. Don Bosco would have tried to enter into one another's views by speaking frankly with one another, help one another. Let the good of one be the good of all, the sufferings of one, the concern of all. Here is all of Don Bosco's great heart, the heart of Papa Don Bosco, as the confreres who left Italy to go to Latin America used to call him, and actually writing to him, they used to say, "Caro Papa Don Bosco." The greatest of all sneering cynics who ever lived, Voltaire, speaking of religious, made this supremely cynical remark: "They come together without knowing one another. They live together without loving one another. They die without shedding a tear for one another." The thought that these words might even in a distant way apply to his Salesians was repellent to Don Bosco. He shied from anything and everything that might distantly liken them to either monks or friars. Unfortunately, I think we said this, the clergy, and even more the religious orders in those days, were unjustly discredited. It was a terribly anti-clerical atmosphere in which Don Bosco lived and worked. But the last thing Don Bosco wanted for his Salesians is that kind of an image of people who did not know what to do with themselves, who did not care for one another, who were not interested in doing much good to other people. We have seen how reluctant he was at first to give the society he had in mind the structure of a religious congregation in the manner of the existing ones. He bowed to the directives of the Holy See, but let it be known that if his Salesians were to be religious, they would be a completely new type. His society would run like a family, would in fact be a family. And says Don Rinaldi that Don Bosco insisted that life in our communities move only on the wheels of brotherly love. Coercion of any kind spells death for our family spirit. Discipline with us is to be understood simply as a way of keeping things running smoothly in a well-ordered family. Obedience among us must be so filial and prompt that the Salesian superior need hardly ever command. But it is the superior, the provincial, and the director who must know how to elicit that kind of obedience. He will, director, provincial, if he governs with the heart. Did Don Bosco dream up some kind of utopia when he designed his religious society as a family and expected it to run as a family? Well, the results are for all to see. The Salesian miracle, we heard Bishop Sheen call it a miracle he added, that reminds me of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes at the hands of the Lord Jesus. One thing we do know, Vatican II, in its directives for the renewal of the religious life, veered remarkably to Don Bosco's viewpoint. Religious life, the decree perfecte caritatis states, is and should be a koinonia, as near a perfect and authentic a community of love as it is possible for Christians to live. In other words, a family. Don Bosco, I am through, Don Bosco agonized over the prospect that the family spirit might disappear in our society as much as he agonized over the possibility that the Salesians adopt a life of ease and comfort for themselves. This he knew would spell death for the society. We simply cannot afford to lose sight of these things. We heard it last night. We were told by Father Williams that we are at a critical point in this province. The province could still develop magnificently, but unfortunately it could also die. Can it be the society, our mother, and we, your older brothers, plead with you, especially you young confreres, in the name of Jesus and of Don Bosco, don't let it happen. Don't let it happen. In my last year as director of our school, Goshen School, one day I received a letter from the SVD provincial whose residence was near Newburgh, not far away from Goshen. He was asking if he could come to our school for a few days' personal retreat. I might add that he had a nephew, a young boy about 14 or 15, at the school. One could hardly say no to such a request. All provincials have problems, but it seemed to me that he had more than his share. Being that he was a good deal older than I felt a bit uneasy at some of the things he was telling me. He knew Don Bosco's life inside out and admired his spirituality and educative system. He said, I think that's where some of our problems might find a solution, in the spirit of Don Bosco. Frankly, I worried that what he saw at the school might jar his admiration for things Salesian. Before he left, he insists that I take a most generous check, $1,000 in those days. Don't you Salesians change, he told me with utter sincerity. You have what it takes. You are a family. And I can't for me think there could be anything better for a religious community. When you think of it, it all seems very natural. It is certainly not new. In fact, it is as old as the gospel. Love one another as I have loved you.